Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Midweek program at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. My name is Blake, and I'm the education assistant here at the Arboretum. And today we are on the north side of the Education Center because although it is the middle of March, it is the high temperatures in the 80s today. And we got a little bit of shade, but not only that, there's a whole bunch of Narcissus here, a whole bunch of Daffodils here. We've got a program for you today. Our research technician, Tim Alderton here, is going to be going deeper in the garden. He's going to be telling us all about daffodils, all the different varieties, a few select cultivars, and he's got a whole bunch of beautiful cut flowers to show you. So it should be a wonderful program. Those of you joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment down below. And with the announcements out of the way, I will pass things over to Tim to tell us a little something about daffodils.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about Narcissus with deeper in the garden. And as Blake was saying earlier, there's who knows what is it Narcissus, Narcissuses, or Narcissa, you know, but anyway, whatever hard. You call them. And
we're going to call them daffodils. Yeah. It's obviously easier.
Daffodils, but that's, yeah, I mean, anyways, I'll give you a little history on that too. Just a tiny speck. I'm just dabbling in this. I am not a Narcissophile, but I'm sure there's somebody out there. If you are a true Narcissophile, you can turn this off because I'm not going to tell you anything new. But I'll tell you a little bit. I'm not going to dig as deep as one could. It could literally take hours. So I'm just going to scratch the surface on this one in reality. So anyways, where does the name come from? Narcissus is what I kind of looked up first. And it comes from the Greek, and it's derived from narke, which I probably am murdering the pronunciations. It's N-A-R-K-E apparently, but I'm sure it's in a Cyrillic language or alphabet and not in our modern language alphabet that we use. But anyways, so basically narke would mean numbness. Torpor from its narcotic properties. So narcotic is also from that same derivative of narke. And they're not sure whether the narke part comes from the actual toxicity of the Narcissus or if it comes from the intoxicating fragrance that many of the Narcissus actually have. And so there's some interpretation there. So anyways. And and if you know any Greek mythology, or it kind of goes, I think, into Roman, but the Greek mythology, there is Narcissus, and Narcissus was a fellow. He kind of basically fell in love with his own reflection and died looking at himself in the water. And where he died, the gods made this lily come up, and hence a Narcissus, and it had a nodding flower, like so many of the Narcissus actually has it, kind of look down. And so that's where that comes from, as well as basically falling in love with himself with that corny joke earlier. You know, I don't remember how quite that went, but if you were listening earlier, you may have heard that. So
that was a little bonus for the people that joined us live. Those of you watching this on YouTube, we do this live every single Wednesday, and if you join us live, we have a lot of fun. So if you feel like you're missing out on a good joke, you absolutely are. So join us Wednesdays at 3.
So anyways, what most of people actually might call these are daffodils. And so that name originates in the mid-16th century, apparently, and it's from Middle English. Affodil, not a D, or A-F-F-O-D-I-L-L. And that comes about from the medieval Latin affodilus, which is A-F-F-O-D-I-L-U-S, which is a variant of Latin for asphodelus, which we actually have some asphodelus in the garden, which is a different plant. But the D, they aren't even sure when that came about to add. They actually added the D to it. So it's basically asphodelus or daffodil or daffodilus, you know. That's where that common name came from. It's actually a different family of plants, but at that time period, they would have lumped them all into the lilies. Anyways, because now these aren't in the lily family, but I might mention that later on. And so the other name that's really common are jonquils. And that comes from early 17th century. In the modern Latin, they had jonquilla, or in the French, I'm really going to murder this too because I took Spanish. Jonquille, I'm going to say. I don't know.
Close enough, for sure.
And then from Spanish, I can do this one. Junquillo, which is diminutive of junco, which comes from the Latin juncus or juncus, the rush or reeds. So we have juncus or juncus in the garden. Let's see, what are they called? They're just commonly called rushes. And so that's a totally different family of plants. But the leaves on most of your species type jonquils are round. The hybrids, it's a different story, but so they're round, not flat like your traditional. Most of your, what I would call daffodils, have a flat leaf or a wider leaf blade. So that's kind of some of the origins of names. But like we were also saying earlier, there's all kinds of different common names for them. Lent lily is a name for some of them because a lot of them flower during the Lent period. Also, my grandmother called them Easter lilies. It would always throw me because Easter lilies to me are Lilium longiflorum only. But I will let my grandma, I let her get away with that, and I'd have to just, what are you talking about? They're not flowering. If you had that lily flower, that Lilium longiflorum growing out in your garden, it wouldn't flower till May or June, actually, at the earliest in Pennsylvania, and they're only half-hardy. But anyways, so I'm very literal. And I'm sure some of you may have some other common names that you have called them in your families as well. So, there's a lot of, over the millennia, there's been a lot of trouble classifying what we now call Narcissus. I didn't even dig too much into the different names. There were different genera that they called them. And it's hooked, I think, into the early to mid part of the 20th century till they actually decided, yeah, these are just Narcissus. They're not 4 or 5 other genera divided up. They're all close enough related that they can just all be Narcissus. So today we call them Narcissus, and depending on the reference and how you see them divided up, there's been anywhere from 20 to 200 different species, varieties, and subspecies recognized that are naturally occurring. And then the range of them is mostly the Mediterranean area, and with concentration, the center of diversity being the Iberian Peninsula, so Portugal and Spain. But in these areas, some of them overlap and you get complex hybrids, sometimes naturally, which has made it even much more difficult to definitively saying how many species there might actually be. 2 of the most common ones are Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus, which I'll show you a couple samples of later on, and some of the Narcissus jonquillus, and some other similar species. And the common hybrid between that, earlier you actually saw a form of it, is Narcissus X odoratus, which is a naturally occurring hybrid of Pseudonarcissus and jonquillus, and where they overlap in, well, do I even have where they actually overlap? I neglected to put where that's actually from, but anyways, it probably occurred on the Iberian Peninsula because you get both species in that region in particular. But they are often, odoratus is often considered sterile, but apparently if you get them in the right situations, you may get a couple kids if you back cross it with either an odoratus, a Narcissus pseudo-Narcissus or a Narcissus jonquillus. So, but alone, they don't produce children. So, which is kind of good sometimes. So, like I said, there were over anywhere, like I said, 20 to 200 big differences there. Here in the garden, we just grow a couple different species, and some of them I was like, they want to lump them too, some of them. And it's we have them in under, I think, actually a couple different names for some that could be the same. I can look at them and they look strangely identical. So that might be like Narcissus ferdinandii, which we have variety cordubenensis in it, which is a species from, that is, the ferdinandii is from Portugal and Spain. Cordubenensis is just from a region in Spain. It's a variety within that. I can't distinguish between the species, but then I also saw references that could be jonquillus variety, a variety of jonquillus as well. So, or jonquilla, I should say, as well. So it's sometimes splitting hairs. And even one of the selections that have a name on in here, it's probably just the straight species, but they've given it a name selection, and they don't even include this specific epithet there. They just give it a varietal name. So their cultivar name. Really muddy, let's just put it that way. But there are some that are fairly distinct, and some that are fairly cute too that I do have. But we don't have a large collection of species here at the garden, but we do have a fair number of Narcissus, but to tell you the truth, there's just a couple named varieties of Narcissus, and talk about muddying the waters. There's any references I saw as 27,000 or more name selections, or even 30,000 or more. So either way, there are so many that have been named, and most of this breeding has happened since the late 1800s and early 20th century on. So it's fairly all recent that these have occurred. They aren't quite as bad as daylilies. To get a seed to flower, it takes like 5 to 7 years. So daylilies are like 3 to 4 years, if that. So it takes a bit longer in a Narcissus, but tons of variation in there. And even more fun comes whenever you think that they divide Narcissus up into, I had this somewhere. Let's see if I can find it, where I put my notes down here. Did I lose my notes? I know I did it somewhere. Oh, okay. There's 7 sections. And within those sections, there are also subsections of the genus. And within those subsections, there's also complexes on some of them. So it gets really complicated. Just it's not easy, but there are some that are very familiar, like the jonquils, the what we would typically call the Narcissus or the daffodils, and then you have like the Tizettas, which are like your paper whites, and the hoop petticoat types, and there's at least 3 other ones. And I didn't write them down on here. It's very complicated, and you can find a lot of this stuff online, which is how I found a lot of this stuff out. But it does take some digging, as I was finding. So, but it's fun if you like that. If you have a rainy afternoon or morning, it's a good project. So, and if you want to know more. So anyways, the RHS, they have a registry which kind of helps to divide some of this up, as well as the American Daffodil Society also with the RHS has a daffodils divisions. So within these, there's also divisions, and these are to help with the complex hybrids in reality. But it also has a section with, or a division that fits the species as well. So anyways, the formal name, and you can find this stuff online, and it's actually searchable. It's great. And that's how I found out a lot about some of these Narcissus that we have here. And sometimes there's not much about them, but is this the International Daffodil Registry and Classified List. And you can find that online. And you can put in a daffodil's name or a Narcissus's name, a selection, and a cultivar, and it'll search. And it'll say, sometimes there's multiple plants with the same name, which that's not always a good thing. But the great thing on this is it'll say the colors on these registries. So it's like a yellow on yellow, or a yellow on white, or a yellow with an orange. So you can maybe definitively figure out which one they're actually talking about and which one you have. But so anyways, so I am going to try to show you some of the different divisions of, I think I have representations of all the divisions but one in here, and it's just because it's a late flowering group that we don't have any in the garden right now, but we have some photos. So anyways, the first one is, your classic daffodils are what would be in this group, and they are the trumpets. So that's division 1 in this classification system that the RHS and American Daffodil Society has set up to simplify this in reality a little bit. And so I have a couple representations of that in here. The first one I have is hiding down here on the ground, and we're going to see if we can get this on camera. This is one golden sunbeam. I couldn't find a whole lot about this one, but this is your classic daffodil. It might be similar to one called King Alfred, which has been around, but this is one that the name predates 1949 is what it tells us. If you search the registry, they don't have the parentage, and sometimes they have the parentage in the breeder. I didn't worry about breeders on most of them, but I did try to find out some of the parentage if I could, because that sometimes gives you an indication on how things came about, and because like I said, it gets complex, and to me it's rather interesting. But this is your classic one here, and this is one that's been in the garden for decades. We don't even have an accession number on this one anymore. This probably predates JC's passing, and I'm going to say this is probably from the late 80s, early 90s, if not before that it's been in the garden. So a long time survivor. I will say this one for us, it's an early flower, or relatively early flowering. They're about done in the garden now that we had this 75 to 80 degrees now the last couple days. I put these in the refrigerator on Monday to hold them because I was anticipating today's weather. But this has that classic trumpet daffodil look to it. It's fairly large. And this one, it noted to me, is this really nice frilly edge on this. And you'll see that on a bunch of other types, but the trumpets they sometimes have a more clean edge on them too, as I'll show you in this next one, which is still a little frilly, but I didn't go crazy on my trumpets. But this is another trumpet. This is actually a fairly new one in comparison, and I have to see what its name is. Oh, Lucky Number. And I didn't find much about Lucky Number either, but it's a little bit different, and you can see hopefully. It's a little less frilly to me. The petals are much more rounded, or actually the tepals are much more rounded in comparison to that of the golden sunbeam, which are a little more pointed and thinner. So there's a little more substance to it. But the colors can be on trumpets just like any other ones can be white. Oh, actually, I need to go back a step because Narcissus are kind of unique, and there's a few other plants in the same family. Oh, and that was the other thing. This is in the Amaryllis family, the Amaryllidaceae, the Narcissus. But and you'll find this. These have petals and sepals, which are these ones that the 6 look like petals all around the outside, and they have all the sexual parts that are unique. You have stamens and pistils, and the flowers are perfect. But not every plant has what's called a corona, and the corona is what we call the cup, or on a narcissus or a daffodil. And there's a few other plants that do have this, like Hymenocolish, you'll sometimes see that on. In the passion flower, they don't have a cup, but they have frills, which are the corona. It's just split up into a million things. And that's one of my other dicots that has a really cool characteristic of having a corona. But there's only a handful of plants in reality that have a true corona. So that's something that makes them fairly unique. So going back to what I think what I was saying was that the corona and the petals, or tepals in this case, which are the sepals and petals together, because there's 3 petals and 3 sepals, and they look all similar, and they just generically call that a tepal. So anyways, they can be different colors, or they can be the same color. So in this case, this is just your traditional yellow on yellow, and the registry tells you if it's yellow on yellow, or yellow on white, or white on yellow, or white on orange, or white on pink, white on white. So to help differentiate the different selections and give you some semblance of, am I looking at the right plant? Because it is confusing even to me sometimes. So, because they can look fairly similar. So anyways, those are just 2 traditional trumpet Narcissus there. So I'm going to jump to the second group, which is actually the large cup. So trumpet different than large cup, which I kind of find ironic, but the cup is wider. And one that I have grown for decades myself and is this one here. I grew this one, I forced this one when I was back home. It's the first time I tried to force Narcissus, because in Western Pennsylvania, you don't get too many flowers until April, and it would get rather depressing. I could have these in flower in March. This is Ice Follies, and Ice Follies has been around since the early 50s, basically. And I mean, after having grown it myself, I will have to admit this, and Brent Heath, who is a daffodil expert and breeder and friend of the Arboretums, he coined ice floppies. They have a tendency to fall over in the garden. So instead of ice follies, it's ice floppies. But I do like this one. These aren't showing the characteristic that they age. So I didn't get an old one, I should have. They start out fairly bright white tepals with a fairly bright cup, and it's large. And I should tell you what a cup is. Oh no, it's like I said, the large cupped daffodils. They're one flower to a stem. The corona cup or cup is more than 1/3, but less than equal to the length of the perianth segments. That's the petals. So like I said, it gets complicated. So anyways, this has a large cup. And this fades, and it'll turn almost pure white with just a hint of cream to it while they age. And they actually, Ice Follies, it can give you this multi-toned look to it. And if you look up the description on the RHS, this calls this a white on a white, and not a white on yellow, which I kind of found ironic, to tell you the truth. But this is a traditional large cupped Narcissus. And we're going to go to some other ones here. This is one I really like, and it's older than I ever thought it might be. But this is really frilly, and it's very appropriate when I tell you the name. This is Can Girl. She looks like she's ready for a dance, doesn't she? She has those frills, and she's from 1977. Ice Follies, I don't have any information on the parentage of, but I do have Can Girl's parents. Muscadet and Hillbilly are her parents. Hillbilly is her father. Muscadet is her mother. So anyways, so she's also a large cupped Narcissus, and from 1977. So she's only a year older than me or so. At least that's when she probably first flowered. But that's a pretty one there. Some of the other colors, they don't always have to be yellow, and there are yellow on yellow ones, but this is a yellow on orange. This is Monal, M-O-N-A-L, and this is about the same age as Can Girl, because this is from 1976. Monal's parent, let's see, there's an unnamed parent, whose parents were Armada times Paracutin. And then that was the mother, and then Falstaff was her father. Sometimes the information you can find is fairly detailed, sometimes it's not. I take that back. I picked up the wrong one. I'm sorry. This is Monal. So ignore what I just said. This is Monal. And that's one we have had in the garden for a long time. I'll get back to this one. But you can see here, you can have the yellow and orange together on this one. Here, the one I accidentally put down, this is Dr. Alex Fleming, which is a white with a really frilly orange corona on that one. So, and did I find anything? I didn't find too much about Dr. Alex Fleming. He predates 1948, so he's a fairly old one, old fellow there. So that's some of the variation on the large cupped ones that we have in the garden. I have to say, one that is becoming one of my personal favorites, though, because there are tons of them in the garden, is the Can-Can Girl. I will say that. I do like that. And I have ice floppies. I mean, ice follies have fallen out of my favor a little bit, but we still do have plenty of those lying around here. And the next group, I don't have many of, but we do have some in the garden. They're just not flowering yet. So this is Matapan, and this is a small cup. And let's look what the small cup definition is, because I can't remember these all. So one flower to a stem, again, much like the large cup or the trumpets. The corona is not more than 1/3 the length. So it has a really short length to it of the perianth, or the petals, the tepals. Matapan's been around, it predates 1940. And it's a cross between Coronac, I think is how you might say that, it crossed with Forfar. And so Forfar in the distant past has a species called Poeticus in it. And that's a whole group of Narcissus. And it was finding a true Poeticus type, because that's another division altogether. This doesn't quite fit that characteristic, but this has Poeticus in it. And what we're getting, those orange tones actually come from the species Poeticus. It actually has red on the edge of the cups, which later on we'll show you a picture of that, hopefully. So that's where these orange tones are coming from. It's about the only species that has that character in it. So if it has orange, red, or pink tones to it, it somewhere in its lineage has Poeticus, which has a very short cup as well, but has its own group or division. So that's the only one I have about that one. So I'm going to skip the next one for now, the Division 4, and you'll find out why later on. And we're going to jump to number 5, which is right here. I have Division 5, and that is the Triandrus group. And I only have a couple that are flowering right now in these. Characters of Triandrus are clearly evident. So the species Triandrus is in the breeding of these, and typically they have usually 2 or more pendant flowers, and these fit that description here. And to a stem, and the perianth segments are reflected. So the petals stick back a little bit. And if we can see this one, this is actually another of my true favorites. Can you see that one? Yep. Okay, so this little one is called Hawara. It's a jonquilla crossed with Triandrus, species cross, basically. So it crossed 2 species, but it has the characteristics of the reflex petals. True jonquilla don't have reflex petals. It's hard to see on this. These just opened since yesterday. I didn't have any Triandrus to show you until this morning, more or less. But this has been one of my perpetual favorites. It's late. It has very thin leaves, much like a lot of the jonquils, and it's very fragrant as well. So that is one of my personal favorites, is Hawara. And I believe that was from breeding in New Zealand, but I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that one. But it came about, let's see, in 1928. It goes before that, actually. So it's a fairly early hybrid, but it's one that has been a long-standing one. And it's a delicate plant, but it is a rewarding one. It will make nice little clumps. And it's just this soft yellow, and I do like that one. The second one I have here, which I'm going to show you, is Ice Wings. And this one doesn't quite fit that. I have some that have 1 flower to to it, but instead of 2, but there are some that have 2 on them as well. This is another Triandrus, and it's a cross between Ischia, which I couldn't find too much out about that, and the straight species Triandrus. So that's, and that happened in about 1958 by that. So it's typically, like I said, they have 2 or more flowers, and the petals reflex a bit, which is some of the defining characteristics, and include the species Triandrus in their breeding. So another one that I really like, and they aren't flowering yet in the garden, is Thalia, and that's fairly common. And it's a nice, a creamy white, much like this Ice Wings, and I do like them. So that covers my division 6s. And did I mention that there's actually 13 divisions? So anyways, Cyclaminius, and I have to find my right vase here now. So one I didn't bring out today that is, we have a very large patch of, and they're almost finished flowering and is well known as February golds. That fits into this Cyclaminius group, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. So Cyclaminius group, characteristics of Cyclaminius clearly evident. So if you've grown a cyclamen, or have seen a cyclamen, you may have noticed that they have these petals that reflects back quite far typically. And that's where the species itself has these very reflex petals typically, or sepals. They have the clearly evident characteristic of Cyclaminius, one flower to a stem. So that's why that triandrous one doesn't fit in with it. That ice wings, even though some of them had one, a lot of them on that selection have 2 to 4 or floret. And then the perianth segments are reflexed, like I said. Flowers at an acute angle. So the flower is kind of held at an angle to the stem with a very short pedicel. And so that's where it attaches. So some of the ones that I have in the garden, aside from February golds, and I have some other ones that are finished, but this is one that is spectacular in our monocot garden right now. This is Rapture. Rapture is a 1976 selection, or crossed with Nazareth, which I didn't look up what Nazareth was, but crossed with the straight species Cyclaminius. And it has those very reflexed petals and sepals, and a very noticeable corona here, which very much fit within that characteristics of a Cyclaminius group. And another of my favorites, which this looks very similar, but it's a little bit tinier, is Might, which it's probably about a third of the size or a half the size of Rapture here, as you can possibly see here now. Might is the straight species Obularia, or Valeria. I can't spit that out. Valeria, which is traditionally, I think it's considered a trumpet type. If it were, the flower looked just like a little trumpet or a small typical daffodil. So it has smaller characteristics, but I have a bunch of different ones in the garden. I didn't pick any of the bicolored ones, but you can have any of the whites and the pinks and the whites and oranges with these same characteristics. But Might is just an adorable one. Who can go wrong with that? And Rapture. They're just so bright and cheery. And Rapture has been a wonderful bloomer in the garden as well. So that's 6. We're heading to 7. We're over almost halfway since I skipped one. So let's see here. So one of the opening pictures that we had showing was this one here. This has become one of my true favorites. This is in the group, the Jonquilla group, or division number 7. And this is Sweet Smiles. This is, I mentioned earlier, Brent Heath. This is one he crossed. And I couldn't find what he used specifically, but being that it's a Jonquilla hybrid, or Jonquill, I can guess he crossed it with a typical pink flowered Narcissus. So a white with, it starts out yellow and fades to pink Narcissus. It would have been a trumpet based on this. And he crossed it with a Narcissus Jonquilla, and you get these nice little clustered flowers. The characteristics of selections Jonquilla are clearly evident on 1 to 5, rarely 8 flowers to a stem. So we have, on this case, I have 2, and I think there's probably mostly 2s here. Occasionally I'll get a single one on here. And the perianth, or the petals, are spreading slightly reflexed. The corona cup funnel shaped, okay, so it looks like a traditional trumpet, or flared. It can be a little more widely open, but it's not quite like on a short cup, or a small cup, or a large cup. Usually wider than long. Flowers usually fragrant, and Jonquilla is a super fragrant species. So This has been one of my favorites, and it's super vigorous for us, flowering just over my shoulder here on the bank right around the McSwain Center. And they're great when they first open. The flowers start out white with a yellow corona, and then it slowly fades to a salmon, which gives a really nice soft appearance on them. And it's been a really good bloomer. So some other ones in here. This one here is one that's actually growing just over that direction for us. This is Narcissus More and More. And it's an adorable little thing. It's like 6 inches tall and flowering its head off. More and More is not the species Jonquilla, but a associated species. And let's see if I can say this without making it sound terrible. Asoanus seedling. It was open pollinated. So, and it's from only 2017 is when it was registered. So it's a really recent one. The foliage on this one tends to actually go out more horizontal. A lot of the straight jonquillas seem to be much more upright foliage to me. But I just find this so adorable. It's maybe 6 inches tall. And it smells wonderful. But it looks like a straight jonquilla to me. So anyways. That is More and More, and it's very floriferous, as its name says. So some of these jonquils, I will say they're from the Iberian Peninsula, so they tend to need as much sun as possible to be good performers. I will say that. In that situation, you get tons of flowers. This next one, actually, I'm going to bring this back because you can see a little bit of the size here, maybe. And the flowers look identical. This is Twinkling Yellow, which is a little taller. And what I learned about Twinkling Yellow is it's just a selection of the species. So I don't know why it's actually given a cultivar. I mean, I would have a specific epithet than a cultivar on it, but they did it just as Twinkling Yellow. But it is Jonquilla variety Henrikii, and then Twinkling Yellow is probably a proper name for that one. Again, super fragrant. We have straight Jonquilla Henrikii in the garden, and it looks just like a few of the other jonquil types that we have in the garden as well. But it's worth growing, and it's a floriferous one. Jonquillas don't always have to be tiny. They can be much larger too. I didn't select any of those this morning, but when I was picking them this morning, and on Monday morning were my times when I was picking most of these. So anyways, that covers some of the jonquillas. They smell heavenly. When I was working on these, collecting all the information for these, I had them sitting on a table, and it was like I was almost suffocating with the fragrance of Narcissus. So let's see here. I need Tazetta. I only have one Tazetta right now. It's actually, I have two, but I only have this one here that I'm gonna show you. This is a traditional Tazetta. This is fairly tall growing. So these include ones like your paper whites, and I'll read you the definition for a Tazetta. The characteristics of section Tazetae, clearly evident. So that's the group, usually 3 to 20 florets or flowers to a stout stem. This one doesn't have that many, but it has more than 3 most of the time. The petal segments usually spreading, not reflex. So these don't go back like on the Cyclaminius very much. And flowers are usually fragrant. So this is your traditional paper white is one of these. So, and if you've ever grown those, super fragrant and lots of clusters of flowers. But this is one called Martinet. I don't have many of these in the garden, and that is Tazettas in the garden, so it was a challenge finding this. But this is one across from 1985, whenever it was registered, and it's a cross between Matador, which I couldn't find anything on. I would have had to really dig back. I went back 2 generations, and it kind of was a dead end. But it has somewhere in there, it has Tazetae as one of its grandparents, great-grandparents, who knows, great-great-grandparents. But they crossed this with Jonquilla. So this is super fragrant, but it doesn't have the characteristics of a traditional jonquil. It got put into the Tizeta group. And to me, a lot of the Tizetas tend to be fairly tall as well. The jonquils tend to be a little more compact, but not always. So that covers that. And I will pseudo cover another Tizeta later on, and you'll understand that later. So my next division is Poeticus, and I don't have a Poeticus to show you, which is division number 9. And I don't know if Blake has an opportunity to show you, I do have Actia on there. They're late flowering most of the times. The parent species, I also have a picture of that, is Poeticus variety, and typically Recurvatus is the most widely grown one of that. But they're typically white, but they'll have a small cup, a very small cup, and the edge will be red on it. On a true Poeticus. Characteristics of Poeticus and related species clearly evident. So perianth segments are white. The tepals are white. The corona is very short or disc shaped. So it almost doesn't, it's flat almost. Not more than 1/5 the length. So that's even smaller than the small cups. The corona usually with a green or yellow center and red rim. That's that. Red rim is the characteristic that's fairly distinct. And this is the Poeticus is where the red pigmentations and orange colors come from typically in your Narcissus. We don't have many in the garden of this group, but we have Actia in our perennial border. And it sometimes doesn't flower until mid-April. And Poeticus is in that same realm. They're some of the last Narcissus for us to have. If you want to extend the season, you plant a Poeticus group is what I would have to say. And they are very fragrant. And again, they have that little bit of green on it. It's a very different look to me. It's not your traditional yellow daffodil. So anyways, we've covered that now. So where did I leave off? And where do I have my next section here? Okay, so I don't have many representational plants of this one either, but, these are starting to fade. This is fairly distinct though. The Bulbocodium hybrids, they're division number 10, and they include Bulbocodium type Narcissus. Bulbocodium hybrids, characteristic of the Bulbocodiums, they're the hoop petticoat types. These little cups with shortened tepals, or the perianth. So clearly evident. So they look like a Bulbocodium, usually one flower to a stem. The perianth segments, so that's the petals segments, insignificant. So you can see how short they are on here. Compared with the dominant corona or the cup. Anthers are dorsifixed, which attached more or less central to the filament. So can care less about some of that part. It's that little petals with a big cup. It's the totally reverse of the small cups and the Poeticus, if you think about it, the characteristics on these. And the style is usually curved. So anyways, I don't have many of these in flower, but some of them will flower in the fall. This one here is white petticoat is the cultivar for it. It is a cross between, it's from 2017 is when it was registered. So it's a fairly recent one. And they're actually just flowering back over here in our flowering lawn. And it's Narcissus cantabricus crossed with one called Diamond Ring, which is a selection of obesus, which is just a tiny little yellow hoop petticoat. So, and cantabricus is also a hoop petticoat. So you get a hoop petticoat when you cross those. You'll sometimes find Diamond Ring. It's a bright yellow, as its name says there. It's a really nice little one, but these I find totally adorable. They will only be 6 or 8 inches tall when they flower. We have another one called Spurrot, which is a very similar color to this, but it's even earlier, and it's finished flowering. They want a lot of sun to do real well, I will say that. So. But I think a lot of the hoop petticoats of Bulbocodiums originate from North Africa. Anyways, that's our only Bulbocodium group here. We're getting down there. So next group are split coronas. There's 2 sections of split coronas, and unfortunately I only have one representation one of the types in the garden, and right now there's another one. Sometimes I get a few flowers of. It's not as prolific for me, but anyways, they break the split corona types into two. You have actually split cups into two. You have the collard, which is what this is, which have opposites on the corona splits up into it all lines up. And then you have papillions, which I don't have a representation of that today, but anyways, this is one of my favorite Narcissus in the garden. It's been impressing me for the last 10 years or more. This is one called Casada. And Casada, I didn't find a whole lot of information, but it's from 1963. It kind of reminds me of a better habited ice volley with a split corona. It has the same characteristics in the flowers open up with white sepals and a yellow corona, and they fade to near white. And I think you can actually see that characteristic here. And these never flop for me. It has been super vigorous in our garden, and it's just a great performer. If you can find Casada, plant Casada. It's fairly early, but it goes for a long time. So that is a favorite of mine there. Let's see here. This is one that we just actually planted a few of these a few years ago, and it looks very similar, just a different color. This is Apricot Whirls, and this is, or Apricot Whirl, and it is a 2006 introduction, and it kind of has a very similar pattern to it, but this has the pink tones as, or apricot, in this case is what they're calling it, Narcissus, but with that split corona. For a little bit different look, we're gonna do this one here. This one's older. I mean, this is a real new one. And I couldn't find too much about this one, but how's that? There we go. This is a lot smaller, as you can see in comparison to those two previous ones. This is Slice of Life, and I like this one. It's kind of frilly, and it's just a tiny little split corona. It's cute. You have the yellow on orange in this case. Very different look to that one. So those are our split coronas that I have here. I don't have a papillion type. So we got those out of the way. So then this is cyclats. This is in a group that doesn't fit in a group. The vision other don't fit any other, maybe interdivision hybrids, which a lot of these are actually interdivision hybrids if you think about it from what I've been telling you. So cyclats is an old hybrid. It's crossed a cyclaminius, like mite here kind of, with a tazetta, like, so it's not quite that cross there, but that's a martinet with and mite, which those are the two classes or divisions that are incorporated in these cyclats. So this is just a tiny little thing. So cyclats is the straight species Cyclaminius crossed with Soleil d'Or, which is French. I murder it, so sorry. Something of gold. I don't know.
You say Soleil?
Yeah, Soleil d'Or.
Yeah.
Son of gold.
You got it, Tim.
Son of gold.
Well done.
So that's actually a fairly common tazetta, which we don't have in the garden. I don't think it needs much chill at all, so it might not even be hardy here. But anyways, so that is just this diminutive little 6-inch tall, maybe 8-inch tall plant we have these. And it's been around since 1922. So the reason I go to that one first is they back cross this one and you get this one. This whole big patch here, if I'm gonna have, this is tete-a-tete. And so it's one of the most common interdivisional or other group that you can find. You will find this one in little flower pots in the grocery store in the winter, tete-a-tete. And that's also a French name, and I'm probably murdering, but that's how I think everyone says it. So
tete-a-tete.
Tete-a-tete.
It means head to head.
Okay, head to head. There we go. So it's a self. So that's kind of it's a self of this. So This is the mommy and the daddy form that. And I can see the cyclaminius in this. It has some of the characteristics of cyclaminius in that. But you can get little clusters on often the single florets, but you'll sometimes get 2 or 3 on these. This is one I've always loved tete-a-tetes. So that is that one there. And it's a compact little thing, but this is big in comparison to cyclades right there. So that's my others. And then I'm going to go to this one here. We're going to jump back to 4 now because of this. So division 4 are doubles. Doubles, okay, this is Abba. Abba is actually a Tazetta, but because it's a mutation, it was a sport of Cragford, which is a Tazetta. And so they lump all double-flowered forms into their own division, which I kind of find strange. I would keep them in their normal division. But anyways, I'm not the ones who split these all up. And then we just looked at tete-a-tete. This is a double form of tete-a-tete. This is tete-a-tete boucle.
There you go,
something
boucle.
like that. So many of the double-flowered Narcissus are just sports or mutations that occur of existing species and cultivars. This is a very early one. I mentioned this hybrid earlier too. Can you see that one? Okay, so this is one of the early hybrids I mentioned, Narcissus odorus, and this is one called plenus, which just means lots of petals. And behind us is, I can't even distinguish between, I don't know why, but there is Flora plenus behind me, which looks the same to me as plenus, so whatever. Whether they're synonymous or I do not know, but those are just double forms of pre-existing hybrids for all intents and purposes, or it could even be a species, just a chance mutation. So they have been given their own division, which again, I find that a little strange. And the last division, I find that I would put it as division 1, to tell you the truth. I should have started with it, are the species. And so I have a few species here. I don't have a lot. Oh, darn, I got that one out of the water. But that's one of my favorites too. And it's all wilted. And this is the tiniest one here. Narcissus wilcomii. Don't use that against it. This is wilted. It got out of its water. But this is about the tiniest Narcissus that we have. It might be the tiniest species. The flowers are only like a little over a ½ an inch across here. Ooh. They're just adorable. And it's in the jonquilla group. So it's just like, actually, it looks very similar. I'm going to show these here. This is Jonquilla variety Hendrickii, right there. So that's naturally occurring. I'm on the Iberian Peninsula somewhere. And this is Ferdinandii, which I think has to be, I've been seeing that they could be synonymous to Jonquilla as well. So this is same subgenera, but these are within possibly the same species if you want to lump them. If you want to split them, it's Ferdinandii and Jonquilla. So if you cross a Jonquilla, that's with this next one is how you get that odora. But so this is another species. This is your quintessential Narcissus, Pseudonarcissus nobilis, which they've divided Pseudonarcissus into several other subspecies and varieties. And sometimes you'll see this as a species itself, which would be nobilis. But if you crossed Jonquillus and this, you'd get an odoratus. That was how I mean, it's going backwards, what we did here. So anyways, and then this is one of my favorites. This is another Pseudonarcissus right here. And it is one of the most spectacular ones we have in the garden as far as I'm concerned. Pseudonarcissus variety mostuatus, which is this soft white. The nobilis is found in northern Portugal, and the mostuatus is found in the central Pyrenees. So a little bit further north, right on the border between France and Spain is where you're gonna find this one. But your Pseudonarcissus go the whole way up into to Germany. And it's been introduced everywhere. But these are your quintessential Narcissus or daffodils in reality. It's after four. And so that I think I just finished.
That's okay.
More than you wanted to ever know about Narcissus. And
You know something, Tim? I sort of stopped paying attention immediately. If you could just go through all of those again, we would love that immensely.
Yeah.
There were a handful of questions.
Sure, yeah, let's see.
Let's do some questions. So Rachel wants to know, maybe I'll paraphrase this one. What's the how do the seeds disperse?
Oh, I think they just drop.
I would think so,
I don't think anything actually goes into to eat them. Because like I said, early on I mentioned they're toxic. There's some really nasty chemicals in Narcissus.
Sure.
Again, this is one of those deer-safe plants.
Yeah.
If that deer wants to eat this, they are really desperate.
No kidding.
There's so many chemicals. I could have spent hours just talking about chemicals if you wanted to. So I'm just guessing they drop.
Yeah.
They don't go far.
I would think that the flower stalk falls over and that's how they spread around.
And then it spreads that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Or disturbance, so yeah.
For sure. So Gail wanted to know, how do you force them to bloom?
Okay. When I did it, you need a cool room or a spare refrigerator. Is the ideal, easy way to do it. Back home, our old farmhouse, we had a drafty corner in our basement. And right next to the door to the basement, I mean, it would get in there'd be frost on the wall. So it's perfect for forcing them. Or I would put them in a spare refrigerator, which is what you would have to do here. There's no way of doing that in our climate here without a refrigerator. I think about 3 months in the refrigerator.
Okay.
Pot them in the pot you want, and do not store fruit with them in the refrigerator. The ethylene gas given off can kill the developing flower bud. So don't put apples especially with them. Or store apples with them if you're doing it in a cool area either. So, but like 3 months and you can have them. So if you really wanted to get them to flower even earlier than they can here, because we can have Narcissus anywhere from, theoretically, I didn't even mention that, we could probably have Narcissus here starting in October if you plant the right ones, go the whole way till at least May.
No kidding.
So if you want them earlier than that, you could you could force them that way, or you can grow. A lot of the Tazetas need little to no vernalization to flower. So that's like your paper whites, and that Soleil d'Or, that one, as far as I know, does not need any chilling to flower.
Sure. So you're saying you chill it for 3 months and then
you
put
bring
it in a pot and you...
No, I actually ever do it in the pots, so they root out.
So they root out and then grow in nice, comfortable, springy temperatures.
You can buy pre-chilled bulbs probably too, but you still want to have to root them out a little bit before you try to get them to actually come into flower. So there'd be at least a short time. And they don't need light during that period either, so is when they're dormant.
Right.
And for the forcing period.
Okay. So Marilyn says that she's always heard that Narcissus poeticus mostly don't like our heat this far south. And so she's wondering if that means that Narcissus with the red, orange, and pink, because you mentioned that they get it from the poeticus, if that might be an indication that they might not do as well here.
I don't know about that. I mean, the only thing with the straight poeticus that are really late flowering, they probably will senesce much more quickly because, like I said, they're starting to flower here, I would say mid-April till early May. So we have like a 2.5-3 week period that they might flower. While some of these other Narcissus, if we have cool weather, I can have, I didn't mention it because it's totally done flowering, Reinsveld's early sensation, which typically flowers anywhere from Thanksgiving till mid-January to late January. It can have a 3 to 4 week, just an individual flower being open because they're flowering during the coolest times of the year. They're not senescing as quickly. But those poeticus, they're flowering so late that we often here in our area have 85 to 90 degree days could occur whenever they're coming into flower, and they will just senesce fairly quickly. But they have been very vigorous. I have Actia in the perennial border. It's flowered there for years. We also have recurvatus, or that is Poeticus variety recurvatus in the garden as well. And I actually have a picture of that in that small collection I had from several years ago. but that's one that does fine here. But again, they're going to be the end of season ones, and don't expect them to last long. You might pick them and put them in the refrigerator as they're opening, and then or if they're forecasting a hot weather, and you can probably get them to hold a little bit longer. But
Okie dokie. And one final question. Marilyn was curious if the species you covered are more fragrant than the selections.
It just depends, but some, I hate to say, even the species, the jonquils are super fragrant, and they can almost be overwhelming. Some of the hybrids, it's toned down a bit, and it's actually quite pleasant to me. So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No kidding. Okay. Well, that was fantastic, Tim. Thank you so much for going us through that. Like, obviously, there's way more to it.
I just touched the surface of it in reality.
Honestly,
because
yeah.
I did a little of the history,
and then just a handful of selections from each. Like, there's
group.
Hundreds in each group, and
exactly with over, let's say 30,000 plus name selections. There's something you can sort of grow. And I didn't even get into hardiness. There's difference in hardiness.
Kidding.
Some of them are a little more tender than others. While we can grow a very wide selection in this area. Further north, you might not get some of the Tazetas, for instance, that you can grow here. Or some only range into zone 6 versus some will range into zone 3.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No kidding. And it looks like we got Tim started talking about daffodils. We do have to cut this program off, though. Tim will keep talking about daffodils. In the meantime, I will thank all of you for joining us today on the Midweek program. We will be back next Wednesday at 3 o'clock. We'll be talking about Hemimelidaceae. We will see you all next week. Y'all take care.